Fort Morgan, and then one in the metropolitan area, and then there's 2 webinars. So really the goal of these meetings is to provide a high-level overview around the final FirstNet state plan, and to an extent as we can, the alternative plan process, and we'll get to that later on. And really to provide you guys the opportunity to understand what the final state plan looks like, what some of the key issues are, and give you the opportunity to provide feedback to our governing body. For everyone that doesn't know, we have our governing body in place, and they will be making a final recommendation to the governor at some point in the next 90 days. And what we ideally would like is to have you provide, local feedback through, the governing body, whether that's through your discipline, whether you're law enforcement or fire or EMS or local government or county government. We have all the disciplines and all the levels of government represented on our governing body, and our goal is to have you push that feedback through that governing body so that they can deliberate, take all the feedback they get into account and all the information, and then come up with a final recommendation. So this is kind of an effort to get you guys aware of what's going on. If you're not speaking, could you please mute yourself? We got someone with some background noise there. So given that, we're a little bit limited in these webinars in that we have to present based on public information. There's 2 portals for the final state plan. One is a public portal that anybody can get into. The other is a private portal that that is credentialed and requires you to agree to a terms of use. The private portal has much more detailed information in it, but again, we can't share that information with people who have not agreed to the terms of use. So in these meetings, not knowing if everyone has agreed to those terms of use, we have to go with the more limited public information. So what this is meant to do is really provide a high-level overview of some of the key issues, some of the highlights. But if you're interested, we really encourage you to view the private portal. If you don't already have access, all you need to do is shoot us an email, and then we can work to get you your credentials to get into that private portal. And as I mentioned, it's got much more detailed information than we'll go over today. So this is really just meant to be an overview and a high-level discussion. Overview of the process and the timeline. The final state plan was delivered on September 19th by AT&T and FirstNet. We then received our NTIA funding level on the 29th, which we actually got it. Volume was very low. Okay, hard to hear. We just got our notes. Okay, is that better? Hopefully. So we received our funding level from the NTIA, which we'll talk through. Actually, we received it on the 28th, but that initiated. It started the 29th as the 90-day window. So basically what that means is the final decision is due no later than December 28th. And as I've mentioned, I can't speak for the governor, but I highly doubt he wants to deal with this over the holidays. So I'm guessing he's going to want to make a final decision before the 28th of December. In between now, what we're doing is this feedback process, which this is part of that effort, these regional meetings. We're also doing some specific outreach to key groups throughout the state, and then anyone that's interested in providing specific feedback, we welcome that as well. The FirstNet governing body is having continuing meetings both with AT&T and stakeholders to review and listen to feedback and then process and make a final recommendation. So that's really kind of where we're at with the timeline. The state plan portal overview, as I mentioned, firstnet.com is the public portal. Anyone can go there. It's got the basic information on what the FirstNet offering is. And this is what we'll be focusing on is the information available in this portal and what's available there, and a little bit of other public information from some of the procurement, the NASPO procurement team and such as that. So really, when we look through it, what is the FirstNet solution? Hold on a sec.
People are complaining about the view.
Oh, really? Okay. Is that better for the view, hopefully? So when you look at what is the AT&T FirstNet solution, essentially the solution is built on AT&T's existing network. What they're looking to do is essentially upgrade their network and provide a dedicated Evolved Packet Core on their existing network that would handle all public safety traffic and provide nationwide priority and preemption on their existing network across all bands. They have been provided the 20 megahertz of spectrum from the FirstNet, which that spectrum will be integrated into their existing network and deployed in strategic areas throughout the country to augment the capacity. So basically what you're looking at is the AT&T network with additional resources and assets in there. There is discussions that we've been discussing with AT&T about expanded coverage. They're committing to certain coverage milestones, and again, those aren't available in the public portal, but they are available in the private portal. So if you log in the private portal, you can see what year 1, year 2, 3, 4, 5, et cetera, and then what the final looks like in there in terms of coverage. And again, in addition to that, we're looking at, talking to them about some key coverage areas, which we'll get to here after a while. It does use regional carriers as well, so they have a few of the regional carriers already as partners and are working on others. In our state, the 3 primary regional carriers are ComNet, Union, and Bureau. So those of you folks in their areas are probably familiar with them. So that's really what the crux of the AT&T Firstnet solution looks like. So when we look at one of the key issues that, as we've traveled around for the last few years, coverage is king. And so that's that's the first thing we're going to kind of dive into is what does the coverage look like? Again, what we're going to be talking about is all publicly available maps and data. Hold on a second. Is there still problems?
Just the edge is cut off. Let me see if I can. If you want to just keep talking.
So what we've done is what we'll try to do is try to show you guys a picture of what coverage looks like today, and then what kind of some of the key areas of interest are. Again, I really encourage you to go in to the private portal. There's a lot more detailed coverage maps, but this will kind of give you what we're looking at and what the thought process is. We'll try to identify LTE versus non-LTE. That's one of the critical factors that we're looking at is, part of the AT&T plan is to basically upgrade the existing areas where there's not LTE to LTE coverage to kind of create that seamless, uniform operation. And then what we wanted to do was just really see what that looks like. So if you look at here, this is the composite coverage from the Firstnet.com portal. So if you look here, and I apologize, I know I'm colorblind, so if I have some crazy descriptions of colors, that's why. But the dark blue is basically what AT&T is proposing as by the end of 2017, and I'll qualify that at the end of this year, as LTE coverage. The light green is 3G, the gray is 2G, the light blue or purplish is roaming partners, and then the white is no coverage at all. So this is kind of what AT&T has stated is kind of the way the world will look at the end of 2017. What we also did, we also look at 2016 FCC coverage. Now this is just focused on 3G and LTE. So based on the 2016 FCC Form 477 data, which for those of you that are unfamiliar, all carriers have to report twice a year. They have to provide data to the FCC. And unfortunately, it's very lagging. So the only data we have access to right now is the December 31st, 2016 data. So this is older data, but this shows kind of the picture of LTE, 3G, and the roaming partners as well. Same legend. So as you'll see, similar coverage. Obviously, if we go back here, it shows that AT&T has been upgrading their network this year, which they have said that has been one of their priorities. So what this does is just kind of set the frame of where coverage exists right now, which is, as we mentioned, based on the fact that this solution is based on AT&T's current network, just trying to create a baseline of, okay, this is what coverage looks like today. So one of the things we did is we had access to some data from the State Patrol. As with most of your jurisdictions, I'm sure most of your vehicles have trunk-mounted modems, and we have some NetMotion software. Actually, this is PepLink on the State Patrol that can track the coverage. And so what we did is we went back and mined the data from the State Patrol devices from 2017 and really mapped that. And so what we tried to do is figure out, okay, where are we seeing good coverage, where are we seeing not good coverage? And so if you look at this map, and while there's a whole different colors, they kind of all blend together into kind of the green, yellowish, and then the purple. Basically, the green, yellow is where we're seeing good and good LTE coverage. The purple is where we're seeing, purple and red is where we're either seeing 3G or poor or no coverage, kind of all condensed. So if you look at the map, the typical areas, that we see are, typical trouble spots. I don't think are anyone's surprise are where we see trouble spots. Monarch Pass and through Highway 50 through Gunnison, the northwest part of the state up here, Highway 145 over here in the western slope, Park County, these are all areas, again, I don't think anyone has, I'm surprising anyone that's saying those are the trouble spots that we've seen throughout our state. So what we tried to do here was just really get a baseline of what does the actual, what we're seeing on the ground look like compared to the model. And, you know, when we throw out these coverage models, they are models. They're based on, you know, algorithms and scientific parameters that, you know, sometimes those parameters match up to what we see on the ground, sometimes they don't. So that's really kind of what we're trying to see, is where things match up. So if you overlay the coverage that we have, and again, this is from the FirstNet AT&T portal, so this is the overall coverage. You can see that, you know, in the areas where they have reported strong LTE coverage, we've pretty much confirmed that there is good coverage. Again, on these maps, you'll see the green yellowish is areas, in these high population areas in the highways, you'll see we verify that, yep, there is good coverage there. There are a few areas where we kind of are saying, you know what, might not be as good as you report on the model. You know, you look down here, the Telluride, again, this far southwest area, again, very rugged terrain. So what this probably says is the model says something, but what we're seeing on the ground is a little bit not, that happens all the time. And then the other thing we're seeing is in areas where there's not strong LTE coverage, we are seeing weaker coverage. In the areas where 2G and 3G, again, not really surprising. So this is kind of what we're seeing with modem data. And again, we'll go to some more, but we'll go to some more maps. But this is a trunk-mounted modem with an external antenna. So this is pretty much the best possible coverage you can get. You know, when you're looking at outdoor coverage with an antenna. So we also did some in-vehicle coverage testing. And so we took some devices and put them in vehicles. And as we were driving around the state doing our outreach, and a couple of days, we did some specific drive testing in areas that we had feedback that weren't getting good coverage. And so what we wanted to do was test the outdoor coverage. Again, that's kind of the best possible coverage with that antenna versus kind of a more practical application of a device sitting in a car. What does that look like? And, you know, you're bound to have some differences. You get lost in the vehicle. But again, what we wanted to try to see was just, again, draw some contrast, try to draw a picture of what coverage looks like from a practical perspective.
Brian, when you talk about practical perspective, can you talk about some of the science parameters? Is it just your own personal device? What kind of, when you say this is what we had, is it just, can you talk about that, science parameters of the?
Yeah, so again, these were Sonom devices. I think most of you guys have seen the Sonom devices we have.
Provided by AT&T.
Yeah, provided by AT&T, using just in a car. So whereas the outdoor coverage, as I mentioned, is a trunk-mounted modem with an external antenna. So you get very high gain, you get much less loss with that. Obviously, with your cell phone sitting in your car, you have the loss of, you know, your body loss, you have windshield loss. So the performance, no matter who you're looking at, the performance in a vehicle is going to be worse than the performance with a modem. But that said, you know, most people drive around in their cars with their phone. So we just kind of wanted to just show what the different levels of coverage were going to look like. And basically each of these modeled different things. So for the, if we go back, for the trunk-mounted modem, that application measured RSRQ, which, without getting too techie on everyone, there's multiple different parameters when you look at wireless coverage. There's multiple different parameters. You can measure different things. Some are better than others. So, you know, even within this, it's not quite an apples to apples connection because they're measuring different parameters, but they're one of many parameters that go into the overall wireless coverage. So in this situation, we basically mapped RSRQ and then defined some levels of what is good coverage versus bad coverage, or poor coverage. The same thing we did with this. So this is SINAR, again, just a different parameter that you can utilize in wireless coverage. This was the limitation based on the software. We use different software in the devices than we did the modems. So it basically accomplishes the same thing, just looking at the world a little bit differently. So when we look at this, what we see, again, similar areas, you know, that when we look at kind of the major roads, population centers, we saw, you know, good coverage as well. When we get up into the more rural areas, up in the mountains, you know, the mountain passes, as expected, we saw degraded coverage to no coverage in these areas. So again, really no surprise given the geography and the challenges that we know exist. So when we overlay this coverage with the overall coverage from the AT&T website, again, we're seeing areas where we confirm that, yep, there's good coverage here, but there are areas, again, where we're saying, you know what, you know, here, this is Highway 96 up to West Cliff. So the maps are claiming there's coverage there. We're saying, you know what, there wasn't coverage for a part of there. And a lot of these areas we talked with AT&T and they've acknowledged that. And again, we'll get to that point about some of these gaps. We look in Pitkin County. This is kind of that Pitkin, Eagle County, pretty rugged terrain up there. Whereas the propagation model says there's coverage, but when we look at the actual usage, there's not good coverage there. So again, what we try to do is just create an understanding of what exists today, so we can kind of move forward and say, where do we need to focus moving forward. So this is the FCC data, and again, what you see, kind of the takeaway, I guess you would say, is what you see is where there's strong LTE coverage, it seems to match up. That yes, we're getting good coverage. Where there's not strong LTE coverage is where we're seeing the weaker performance. So again, that kind of from a practical level, that makes sense. So coverage comparison, kind of disregard this Northwest. This was from our rifle meeting. But and this is just comparing what is the end of year 2016 reports say versus what the Firstnet.com website. So at the end of 16, and this is LTE coverage, basically, the AT&T reported about a 48% geographic coverage of LTE. And for the maps, they're claiming they'll be up to 74% LTE coverage by the end of 2017, which again, they have stated that has been a priority for theirs this year, is to upgrade their LTE coverage throughout the state. In the population, you'll see not a whole lot of change in the population, as most of the population is concentrated in the metropolitan area. So before we go into the gaps, any questions on the coverage and the coverage modeling and kind of what our effort was and kind of shows, and again, there's some more detailed maps you can see on the private portal. No questions? Okay.
Brian, is the area covered there, are those including roaming partners or not?
I believe that's an excellent question. Randy, are you on the phone? Can you, for this graph, is that with roaming partners or is that just AT&T?
Yeah, I'm taking a look at my data sets. I believe it is with roaming partners. Yeah, so it would be just LTE. It wouldn't be other technologies in that graph.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, actually it is. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So again, this is just LTE with roaming partners. And again, not all the roaming partners are on this because AT&T does not have agreements yet with all the roaming partners, so we only included the ones they do have agreements with. But they are working on agreements with the other roaming partners.
Thank you.
Okay, so based on this effort, this graph's a little bit harder to see. We'll kind of walk you through it. What we did is we said, okay, in identifying a baseline of where coverage is today, obviously there's going to be gaps, and so where do we want to focus our gaps? And so this map shows just the LTE coverage and kind of where we've identified gaps. So if you see, basically what the legend here is, this orangish is kind of identified gaps. And again, we focused on what we did with this map is just focus on the LTE, saying, what we've said is where we know there's LTE, there's been good performance. So let's kind of just use that as the baseline. And so we went through our map and we went through data based on local feedback. We looked at, transportation statistics, again, talking with local users and said, okay, where do we see gaps? For example, the road from Rifle up to Meeker. The local folks have said, hey, we've seen a tremendous amount of increase in volume, accidents, and we've had a lot of issues with connectivity with all carriers in that area. So we said, okay, that's an identified gap. Again, you look down here at kind of the Park County, unincorporated Douglas County. We've said, okay, those are some gaps. Again, you look at Highway 50. There's, Highway 50 is kind of unique. There's some areas that are very good. There's some areas that aren't very good. And so what we tried to do is identify these gaps and say, here's where we think moving forward we need to focus our resources on getting coverage. And this is just kind of a description of these. So what we did is most of these are just segments. So for example, Highway 103, Evergreen to Idaho Springs. We said that's a gap. At the other end, Highway 14, Walden to Fort Collins. That's an extremely difficult gap. So we just went through and identified all of these, and we came up. There's about 46 segments of road that we said are gaps. We did identify a couple, towns, major towns that we said, hey, there's fairly poor coverage in these towns as well. And so what we did is we went through this list with AT&T, and we said, okay, here's where we think there's gaps. And we actually had a good meeting a couple weeks ago. We sat down and we gave them this list, and then they came back and said, okay, well, here's a lot of the areas that you've identified, we've identified as well. And we've said, yep, we know there's some gaps here. I'll go back to the Evergreen. They said, yep, we know the Highway 103 is a problematic area. And so what we did is they said, here's the areas where we would focus on given what we see traffic patterns are and such. And here's the areas that are going to be really difficult. I'll go back to our Poudre Canyon from Walden to Fort Collins. They basically said, it will take a monumental effort to get that road covered from point to point, which is true. It's kind of the same effort as Glenwood Canyon. We said, we can work on Glenwood Canyon, but getting, coverage completely throughout Glenwood Canyon is going to be a pretty difficult task. So we kind of went through and identified kind of low-hanging fruit. Yes, where we know there's coverage, where we think there's opportunity. For example, 135 here, Gunnison to Crested Butte. They said, yeah, we know that's a problem. And they said, that's probably just one tower. And we've already started looking. We think there's some assets in there. And if we can just get one tower up there, we think we can close that gap between Gunnison and Crested Butte. So that's a fairly low-hanging fruit. So we went through that with AT&T and kind of prioritized these as the ones to focus on initially, kind of a second tier of, the ones that might take a little more resources, might have to do a little more work, and then the ones that are going to be a long time before we get coverage there. So we've gone through that list, and we're kind of working back and forth with AT&T to do that. So that's really what we focus on in coverage for moving forward. So that's kind of where we're at with coverage altogether and the gaps. Before we move on to pricing, any questions that we have before we move on to kind of pricing?
Hey, Brian, can I just correct for a second what I said? Actually, the numbers in the summary chart do not include roaming partners, but we if you include them, they add maybe another 5 to 7% of coverage.
Okay, thanks, Randy. Okay, so just so everyone, so basically, this number is just AT&T. So if we look at that, if you count the roaming partners, by the end of the year, we're probably looking at about 80% coverage LTE statewide.
So, Brian, if you don't mind, go to the last FirstNet coverage gap map.
Yep.
I just want to make sure that I realize there's some limitations of some of the data not being publicly available. But, hey, I'm AT&T, so I guess I can say more. This map here represents a current state, not an end state.
Yes.
And so there's not any of our roaming partners as well as some additional LTE.
Well, there's Viero. Viero's in there.
You're right.
Yeah.
But we're certainly missing significant up in the Northwest and other areas where we are committed to be making that have LTE coverage, whether that's through AT&T or through a roaming partner. So this is not an end state of the network. This is a beginning point, which is really fantastic because instead of taking multiple years to build out, we're starting with a baseline network. And I know that if there are some people that have some strong interest, you already mentioned it, but I would definitely encourage them to get access to the portal.
Yep. Yeah, so what Garrett's referring to, I think, Union has a strong presence up in the northwest part of the state. So the map would look differently if we included Union, so yes. But again, what we try to do was, as Garrett said, create a baseline of where we're at, kind of take a conservative estimate and identifying the gaps for this.
Hey, Brian, this is Anil. Actually, I have a question on, in the legend you mentioned that AT&T coverage and the roaming coverage. So what is that roaming coverage? Is it with the roaming partners or what? Yeah,
this is Viero. So this lighter color here is Viero. They're the only roaming partner we included on there because we had good data from them. So this is Viero. ComNet, if we included ComNet does a lot of work kind of in the central western slope area. A little bit up into here, and then Viero is the primary roaming partner up in this northwest.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, yeah. Sorry, thanks. Yeah, Union is up here in the northwest. ComNet is kind of in this general area, and then Viero is strong in the Eastern Plains, and they're starting to kind of move into the San Luis Valley, Alamos area, western slope as well.
Okay. So Brian, following question is like they mentioned AT&T is mentioning. I guess they are saying that they will be having the roaming partnership with and that will bump up to like 8% or whatever it is. So what is it? Did they give any timeline for that one? Or the roadmap is there or something like that?
Yeah, so that's in the private portal. If you look in the in the private portal, there's more detailed maps that show year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. And
okay. I saw that one. Okay, makes sense.
Yep. Any additional questions on coverage? Okay. So cost and pricing. So some caveats here. You know, what we want to do with the cost and pricing is just kind of give a general overview of what this is going to look like. What AT&T has stated and what they have done is essentially state that they're going to go through the national purchasing vehicles. NASPO is the big one here, the National Association of State Purchasing Officials, used to be WSCA. And basically what that does is that sets kind of a ceiling on the price. So when you go to these purchasing agreements, you say, here's my ceiling for this service or this device or this product. But then every state, you know, every state could potentially negotiate different deals for a state, and then at the ceiling, and then individual agencies can negotiate their own deals as an individual agency. So agency by agency, what AT&T has said is that they will be negotiating agency by agency, you know, on the actual firm pricing of the specific agreements, and then, you know, the state we can look into as we move forward. Based on the NASPO structure, you know, the state could also look into doing kind of a master agreement as well under NASPO.
Brian, I just want to clarify one thing. I think you're pretty darn close. I would just say that NASPO,
oh, yeah,
those are other agreements.
Yes.
And so the state would be able to negotiate through NASPO. Each agency really picks their purchasing vehicle based on the type of organization they are.
Okay. Yeah, procurement's not my strong point. So, yeah. So what we're going to talk through, you know, so there's really, so the pricing you would see that we're going to talk about, that this is the ceiling again, and on devices again, we have there's some rough estimates, but again, I think based on the procurement vehicle, the pricing will change. The one thing we do want to talk about is kind of what the big thing is when you look at the pricing. Based on the AT&T model, there's two types of users primarily. There's what's called primary and extended users. For some background on that, if you look at the definition of first responder at a federal level, there's two definitions. There's one more tighter that basically kind of your traditional first in, hoses and guns, what they say, and I guess EMT, hoses, guns, and syringes, basically. You know, so police, fire, EMS. You know, as a more strict definition. And the other definition basically says police, fire, EMS, and anybody else who helps. And so what AT&T has done is said, okay, a primary user is going to be those first in, police, fire, EMS. They've also expanded that to say 911 and emergency management as well, are primary users. What that means is when we talk about prioritization and preemption on the network, those users will get that functionality for the base price. So the full number right there is $20 a month for the device. If you're a primary user, you will get the prioritization and preemption as part of that $20 a month. If you're an extended user, which is everybody else, public works, transportation, you know, other functions, they will not get that prioritization and preemption unless you pay for it. You can pay for it. You can say, I want these extended users to have prioritization and preemption, and it'll be $7.50 a month per line for that. Now, that said, if you have, let's say you put your whole jurisdiction on FirstNet, and you have your primary users that have this prioritization preemption, and you say, you know what, my public works, my transportation, they really don't need prioritization on a daily basis, so I'm not going to pay that extra. If you have an incident, and all of a sudden you say, holy cow, you know, it's all hands on deck, everyone's got to be on here. There's an ability to what's called uplift. So basically, through a portal you'll have, you can say, I want to uplift all my users for 24 hours to prioritization preemption. So in a big event where you need everybody, you just go in, you say uplift, all your users basically get put into that prioritization preemption functionality for free for the extent of that duration. Now, if you need it for another 24 hours, you know, let's say you've got a fire or something, you can go in and uplift them again. So really, it's just a matter of, it comes down to you making a call of what users you feel, besides your first responders, what users you feel really need that prioritization preemption on a day-to-day basis versus are you comfortable with, you know, just as an incident comes in, managing that, you know, in that specific uplift functionality. So I think that's probably one of the more important distinctions as we look towards pricing. Any questions on that? Gary, did I get that correct? Yep. And any questions on that? Okay. So when we look at the pricing, kind of probably the biggest change that we're going to see And it's not, I mean, this exists now, but it's kind of more structured, is the idea of pooled pricing and unlimited pricing. So when you look at the offerings, there's really two ways you can do it. You can essentially buy a set, or not a set, an amount of data and pool that across devices. So you can say, I want to buy 20 gigs of data and pool that across 10 devices. And those 10 devices all use that, and you pay a per line fee, you know, for that. There's kind of a set fee for that. Now, if you go over that pooled pricing, then there's all kind of overage charges, basically, again, based on the amount of overage. The other thing is unlimited, to say I want unlimited pricing. As you can imagine, the unlimited pricing plans are going to be a little more expensive than the pooled pricing plan. So basically what this comes down to is you as an agency will kind of really need to look at your utilization and say, okay, where does it make sense to have a pooled plan, and where does it make sense to have an unlimited plan? And within the pooled plan, there's different, as you'll see here, there's different pricing for depending on a feature phone or a data-only device or a smartphone. Whereas an unlimited, again, is unlimited. You say this device is unlimited, and you can use whatever you want. Now, as with everything, I think there's some, we'll get to that in a minute about in terms of caveats on unlimited. So for pool usage, you know, it's kind of a use it or lose it. As again, you purchase some bundles, 2, 5, 50, 100 gigabits per month. You know, you use that. There's some limitations on tethering and so forth. You know, so for example, in a pool plan, they limit tethering, whereas in unlimited, you can do tethering. So again, what this really just does is say you need to look at your usage, and it kind of forces you to look at your categorizations of usage. How do you use your smartphones? How do you use your data? Who uses what? And I think, you know, everyone realizes you've got some power users and you've got some folks that don't use much. You've got some low usage devices. You've got some high usage devices. You know, you need to look at your video. How are you utilizing video? That will play into this a lot. So really what the pricing structure in the FirstNet plan does is just really kind of get you to that point where you need to look at that. And again, as you work with, you know, FirstNet in an opt-in situation, you just, you know, they'll have people on the ground helping you through that process and really looking at your utilization, you know, looking at your past utilization and saying what plan makes sense for you moving forward. And again, so on the limited, you know, there's some slight, you know, when we talk about like body-worn cameras and that kind of stuff, obviously that can overload networks. So I think what AT&T has said is when we get into some of those extreme utilization cases, again, sit down and talk through some things. They may need to, you know, throttle certain things, you know, if you're going over a certain amount per month for the prioritization versus non-prioritization, and, you know, what you're using there. So again, really what it comes down to is you'll just need to sit down with your AT&T representative and analyze what your plans are. You know, but again, to me, the big kicker in all this, as everyone knows, is video. If you're a high video utilization agency, you probably need to really do some hard looking at this and figure out what the best plan for you is. If you're not using a whole lot of video, you know, I don't think it'll be as dramatic of an impact. But that is the one big thing that really affects networks in general, not just AT&T, any network. Yeah, so any questions on, yeah, and there's a few things on the unlimited we're still working through. It's, you know, part of the problem is AT&T is quickly updating the NASPO contract, the GSM contract, all these different things. So there's a lot of information flying around, so we're trying to keep real-time information. But again, you know, I think the structure is just to take away is there's kind of these two paths, the unlimited, the pooled. There's certain pricing for each. There's certain limitations on each, and you just will need to understand what is best for your organization. Yeah, so this just kind of walks through. In terms of devices, similar, I think what we're all used to, there's, you know, you'll have the option to either buy the device or, you know, sign up for a 2-year contract and have the device paid off over time. Again, it just really comes down to what you as an organization want to do with that. Any questions on the pricing structure? Okay. One of the things we're working on right now is kind of a cost calculator. It's just kind of a rough estimate where you can go in and based on the data we have, and you'll be able to put in the parameters. So if you know what, you know, if you talk with AT&T and say, hey, you know, this is the kind of the pricing we'll get, you can kind of put in, okay, here's the number of prioritization devices I have, here's the number of extended and primary devices, what's the cost going to be, and you know, you can put in, here's what I'm paying now, and really just a tool to kind of help you extrapolate what does it look like for you to be able to compare, you know, what your monthly recurring costs look like in a FirstNet world versus what you're currently looking at. So we're, Randy and Emo putting the finishing touches on this, and we're hoping to have those out to you guys sometime next week to be able to kind of play around with and help you out. So some other considerations, but just to think about, again, we don't really have a whole lot of information on this. It's just, again, if you go into the private portal, there's some conversation on this. But, LMR interface. It's one of the things I think is still a work in progress with the AT&T solution. They have said they are committed to, working on an LMR interface, but obviously this is kind of complicated because every state does that differently. So, this will have to be somewhat, working out of a kind of an overall general solution versus how does each state, based on what they look like, is there one single statewide ISSI interface, or are there 50, individual interfaces they have to tie into? Is an agency using Simplex or not? So this is kind of a complicated one. They have addressed it, but just kind of something to think about when you're looking, at moving forward, how this plays out. I think moving forward, this will be a critical, as the technologies kind of merge, this will be important. Application integration, we talk a lot about applications. And when it comes down to it, this is just a pipe, just as your current provider is a pipe. Applications are applications. There will be kind of an application ecosystem and store based on the FirstNet ecosystem. It's not limiting. They're not going to say you can't run this application. If you're currently a TriTech customer, you can still run TriTech. But it's just kind of to think through, again, as you adopt this technology, how is your CAD interface going to work with some of these applications? What apps are you currently using? FirstNet has committed, which I think is good, to basically saying we are going to vet certain applications to make sure there's no malware in there. So one of the offerings you're going to be able to have is to say, okay, if I download this app, I know it's gone through some vetting and that it's a safe application. AT&T is going to be doing some same things, basically saying we don't want an app out there that pings the network every 2 milliseconds, causing a whole lot of static traffic. So they're going to make sure that some of these apps that are moving forward are good apps and don't have any malware and that kind of thing. And then the other thing, as we talk about, as we look into some of the apps that are going to become standards, mission critical, push to talk, those types of applications, there will be some standard APIs that FirstNet will vet and push out so that once the standards for mission critical push to talk become implemented in 3GPP, that basically any vendor who wants to create a mission critical push to talk app will have to comply with those standards and work with the standard interfaces on the network. So again, kind of a nebulous concept, but just something to kind of think about. And the last one that's really important for us is deployable assets. So basically, as part of the standard plan, AT&T has stated that there will be 72 deployable assets scattered throughout the country. Think of these as cows, as big, cell on wheels, with their own power, their own backhaul, and can be deployed. They will be strategically placed throughout the U.S. What they have said is that their aspirational response time will be 4 to 6 hours with a 14-hour guaranteed response time. So, and there'll be a method to request them. So, as a local agency or a state, if we have an incident where we need a deployable, there'll be a process where we request that deployable, and AT&T will deploy that asset to where we go. Now, there's also one of the things we've been working with both AT&T and FirstNet on for a while is the idea that if a local agency feels like they want their own deployable asset, maybe it's not a full-fledged cow, but maybe it's something a little bit smaller. You have issues in certain areas, a search and rescue operation or something like that. What AT&T has said is they will work with local jurisdictions on that, owning your own deployable asset, and then the process for implementing that. There's not a lot of details yet on that, but that is something we have talked about. And again, especially if you're in the remote areas, I think is important to think about. So what all we're working towards is kind of a statewide requirements checklist and adoption toolkit. One of the things we did is Randy and Emil spent some time going throughout and interviewing a lot of folks throughout the state, both urban, rural, police, fire, a lot of CIOs, a lot of technology departments, saying, okay, what's important to you? When we think about adopting this network, what are the critical issues to you? Is it security? Is it cost? Is it coverage? Is it integration? And what we've done is create kind of a checklist to say, based on what folks have said is important to them, how does the state plan address it? Does it address it really well? Does it not address it at all? Is it unclear? And what we're working on again is to provide that to you to kind of guide you through again, hopefully as you look at the private portal, you can kind of look through and step through and say, okay, here's the top 3 things that matter to me, and how does the state plan address that? The other thing is kind of an adoption toolkit. Again, it's kind of built on that requirements checklist and the pricing, and saying, okay, based on everything that you know, here's the things to kind of guide you as to say, would you adopt this network? Because really what we want to do, when it gets back to it again, we want to make the decision on opting in, opting out based on local needs. If the governor says, yes, I'm going to opt in, but a vast majority of jurisdictions say, no, I'm not going to adopt this network, that's not accomplishing much, and vice versa. If the governor says, no, I'm going to opt out, but all of the local jurisdictions say, no, we wanted you to opt in. We don't want that disconnect there. So we really want to provide local feedback from you guys as to what your thoughts are on this network and the implementation of this. So before I move on to kind of the alternative plan phase, is there any questions so far? Okay, man, you guys are a lot easier than the rifle crowd. I guess it's a webinar. Okay, so on the alternative plan, where we're at, if everyone recalls, we did have an RFP. We received our final bids on the 14th of September. The review committee, which to review is kind of, it's basically a subset of our governing board with a couple of technical experts on the actual review committee. And then we've also enlisted some subject matter experts from across the state, not to not score the responses, but just to provide some thought and input, as well as Randy Nemo. We're actually meeting tomorrow, the 12th, the review committee, to go over and basically say, are either one of these 2 options viable? Basically, we had Rivada and Macquarie are the 2 bidders. And so what we want to do is basically have this review committee say, here's the winner, or, they're both pretty good. We want to talk to both of them more, or neither one of them are very good. And again, it's based on the folks from across the state putting this input. So that process will be complete. As soon as we can kind of get through that, we can't talk a lot about the responses again because it's an open RFP. So once we can provide some details on that process, we will get those out to you guys as soon as possible. And we do realize we're up against the wall in time frame, so we're working as fast as we can, given the limitations we have with our procurement cycle. The other big thing that kind of factors into that is our opt-out funding level. If everyone recalls, the federal statute states that if we do opt out, we get a certain level of funding. The NTIA came back and gave us a range of basically $71 to $88 million. And the reason there's a range is it depends what other states do. If every state opts out, we'll get the $71 million. If we're the only state that opts out, we'll get the $88 million. And the way that was based on was an NTIA study. They went through and they said, okay, how many cell sites would it take to cover the entire country? And they came up with a number of like 39,500. They then said, okay, let's look at how many cell sites would be in each state. And they came up with 670 cell sites. And so then they basically said, okay, what percentage of 39,000 is 670? And that's the percentage of the allocation of the capital fund that Colorado gets. Now, if you're telling yourself 670 cell sites doesn't seem like a whole lot of cell sites, that's because we, as well as our neighbors in the West, got kind of penalized. If you look at the way the NTI did the study, they basically said we're not going to cover any federal land. What they did is they said we're only going to cover land that has a population of at least 5 people per square mile. And most federal land, I think all federal land, does not have 5 people per square mile. So when you look at the West, we kind of got disproportionately lower. And it's not just us, Montana, Wyoming, Washington, Oregon, all the federal land states, we got kind of penalized a little bit because of that. So it's unfortunate, but still, we'll see what that federal funding level does. We have updated, we provided this number to the 2 bidders and said, okay, please update your financials and your financial projections based on the fact we told them to use kind of a more conservative 70 million as what that means. So that's really kind of where we're at. Once we have more information, we can share that. One of the things as we come back out in terms of, if we do have a viable opt-out plan, what we'll want to know from you is what are the issues in that scenario from your perspective. If the state were to choose to opt out, what would you, would you likely, I guess same kind of thing. Would you likely adopt the network? Would you not? What are some of the issues that would lead you to adopt out versus not adopting in that opt-out scenario? So as we get closer, we'll do with that. So if the state opts out, and I emphasize if, because I think a lot of folks believe we have already made up our mind when we have not, by any stretch of the imagination. So if the state does choose to opt out, this is kind of what the process would look like. Formal notice to FirstNet and other agencies, FCC and Ntia, would be due by December 28th. We then have 180 days after that notice to complete our RFP. We're kind of ahead of the game in that we've already completed our RFP. We then have 60 days to submit our plan to the FCC. So basically, 240 days after we would provide notice to the agencies, we would have to present our plan to the FCC. And now the FCC has said they have a 90-day aspirational review period, which basically says we're going to try really hard to do it in 90 days, but there's no guarantee. But that said, in our conversations with the FCC and their public releases, I think they are committed. They understand the pressing nature of this, and I think they would be committed to providing a quick review period of this. And now that basically technical plan is just based on the RAN and connecting back to the national core. Assuming we would be successful with the technical review of the FCC, we then move on to the Ntia review, which focuses on kind of the business aspects, the financial aspects, the operational aspects of the network, to make sure that we kind of, we prove that us and our partner know what we're doing and can keep up pace. And the final step of that would be a spectrum negotiation for access to the spectrum, which we just received that yesterday we received a draft, a portion of the spectrum lease agreement, and have our legal team reviewing that as well. So that's kind of where we're at with opting out, that process. Any questions? Okay, so kind of wrapping things up, what does opting in really mean? So if we opt in, essentially what we're doing is we're saying, okay, AT&T, you guys get the spectrum, and you want to integrate in your network, and we're going to work and build this out. Hopefully we'll have better performance and coverage. The dedicated of all packet core will help with roaming. One of the issues I think we see a lot is in roaming when you're switching networks. The advent of a single core should help with that. Obviously, there's security, having a single point of security, and then integrating the partners. So really what we're saying is we're building off the existing commercial network and kind of going from there. There'll be individual agency and agreements and standards. So there'll be no statewide SLA. Any type of SLA would be with you as a local agency. And basically the options in our state will continue to be based on kind of a commercial platform. As with opting in and opting out, we reiterate, there is no mandate for anyone to use FirstNet in either scenario. So in an opt-in scenario, essentially AT&T will continue to compete with your business with that added spectrum and with the added resources provided through FirstNet with the other commercial carriers. So that's kind of really what opting in means for the state. What does opting out mean? Basically, we opt out. Essentially, we as a state, we're going to go find a partner to build our own network. And when we say build, what we've said from the beginning, we're not building a greenfield network. We're not going to go out and build 1,000 new cell sites, cell towers. We would use existing assets and basically, again, look for people that have existing assets, whether that's backhaul assets or another commercial partner or existing tower assets, but essentially say, let's try to utilize what's in there. To clear some things up, the FirstNet, our alternative plan RFP specified there will be no upfront cost by the state or local jurisdictions. So what we stated was that your model must essentially take whatever the NTIA would give us, that $70 to $88 million, and you need to come up with capital to build that out. The other thing is it says it must be self-sustaining. So the network must be self-sustaining based on the user fees that would be received for the utilization of the network. So essentially, it is a self-containing unit where we would not be going back to the state and asking for money or your local jurisdiction. Essentially, the usage you pay every month would self-contain that network. So that's kind of what we're looking at, is that we would have the responsibility to build that. It's different in that with our limo radio systems, we've kind of built it ourselves. In this scenario, we would rely heavily on the private sector to actually build, construct, manage, and operate the network. with a more direct agreement with us. There'll still be commercial options. So even if we do opt out, again, you do not have to use it. There will still be, AT&T will still be in business in our state. Verizon will still be in business. Sprint and T-Mobile will still be in business, although there'll probably be one company here soon. Viera will still be around. So even in an opt-out scenario, you'll continue to have commercial options. Governance, if we opt out, obviously there's the governance issue and the operational issue. How do we figure that out? And then the other thing, opting out, what we're looking at is can we capitalize on common economies of scale, and integrate multiple needs. We don't know the answers to that. So the proposals, that's part of the aspect of reviewing the proposals we're looking at. So that's really kind of an overall summary. Again, it's a very high-level summary. We really encourage you guys to go to the private portal. And if you're interested, or your jurisdiction or group is interested in sitting down with us and doing a much deeper dive on the private portal, where we know everyone has signed the terms of use, we're more than happy to do that. But hopefully this should give you kind of some guidance as to what the final state plan looks like and where to go for some more information. So with that, any questions, comments, concerns, ideas?
Brian, I have a comment.
Yes.
I wanted to say that as Colorado is going forward looking at the various options, that I, as your FirstNet lead, will be with you for the duration, whether you opt in or opt out.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
FirstNet, every single one on the FirstNet team, our single mission is to execute the law passed by Congress to build a nationwide interoperable public safety broadband network. And so we did that by going out and talking to public safety, hearing what was important to them, coming up with the 16 objective-based RFP, and we selected AT&T as that partner in that public-private partnership to build that nationwide network. Whether you choose to go with the plan that we presented, or if you choose to opt out and go through the steps to opt out, to do it your own, to build, operate, and maintain that run on your own, FirstNet will still be working with you to make sure that Congress's goal, what public safety wanted, the final recommendation of the 9/11 Commission to be implemented of public safety needs a way to communicate that they don't have now, will be with you. To do that, Congress, there's incentives and disincentives. You talked about the incentives of the $70 to $88 million to help build that that grant. And there's also disincentives. That should there not be the targets that are met, and this is the idea is that it'll be a network nationwide in all of the states and territories that will meet the needs of public safety. And so, therefore, I just want to make sure that everybody knows that, yes, here's the grant money to help build it. There's also that Colorado is saying if they choose to go out, there are those risks. There's a delayed time that you walked through very well about here's where the steps are, and there's also requirements to get the agencies to sign up. And the network must meet the agency's needs, as we talked about, have to have the coverage, have to have the pricing. But I want to just assure you that FirstNet is focused on that nationwide system, whether you opt in or you go with the plan that's presented, that the goal is to have that nationwide system. So that when you have a disaster, public safety is supporting each other, the user has that same experience no matter where they are on the network. So thank you for this opportunity to be here today.
There you go. Any other questions for us or AT&T or FirstNet? No one signaling questions?
Nope.
Okay.
We will be in Fort Morgan next Tuesday, Ed, is that right?
Yep.
And then we will be in the Denver Lakewood area the following Tuesday, the 24th. We'll be in South Fork on Thursday, the 26th, and Pueblo on Friday, the 27th. All of those will have web access as well, the same credential information used today. So if you can attend or desire to attend in person or via webinar, again, we certainly encourage you to do that. Again, if you have any questions, please contact our team. You're also welcome to contact Tracy or Gary with AT&T. They are all resources for any of you if you have any questions that you want to direct specifically to any of them. So
if you want access to that private portal, just let Kim, Brian, Ed know, and then they can shoot that. They just need to make sure that it's all legit, that they're controlling who accesses the Colorado plan.
Correct. We are only providing portal access to public safety jurisdictions in the state. I know we've had a few questions from vendors and other groups. Again,
or local jurisdictions. Yeah, municipalities, counties.
Correct.
Yeah.
But private vendors and other folks who work on the wireless side, we are not providing access to at this time. So, all right.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for your time. Please feel free to reach out with additional questions.
Thank you.